Today we have a CNN debate between Mehdi Hasan and a former IDF spokesperson. They're going to talk about how Hamas has supposedly accepted a ceasefire. The most annoying part about this debate is the IDF spokesperson is still pretending that the hostages are their top priority. That's not their top priority. Their top priority is getting rid of Hamas, which is understandable from the Israeli point of view, but I'm really getting sick and tired of them pretending that they care about these hostages. A lot of them are probably dead because they've been in a war zone for 7 months. He's also going to go with the tried and true strategy. Anyone who disagrees with them is Hamas.
Hamas saying publicly they've agreed to a ceasefire deal, but it's really kind of a counterproposal that they have that includes elements that they know Israel never agreed to. So was this some kind of propaganda effort by Hamas to say, we're at the table, we're agreeing to something?
Well, look, the reporting we have says that, yes, it was an Egyptian Qatari proposal that the Americans were involved in too, Abby. The CIA director Bill Burns has been involved in this. The Israelis apparently were on board until, of course, Hamas agreed, and then the Israelis' bluff was called, and now they're saying, well, we don't agree to this proposal because we want to free the hostages, even though the proposal would help free the hostages.
Okay, I think the only reason Hamas agreed to it is because Israel just started bombing parts of Rafah. Hamas right now is screaming, enough, enough, and Israel is saying, it's enough because you're losing, even though Benjamin Netanyahu helped facilitate funds to Hamas through the Qatari government. But putting that aside, I think that's the only reason Hamas actually agreed to a ceasefire proposal at all, is because they want to stay in power. And I completely understand why the Israeli government has had enough of Hamas, because they constantly launch rockets at Israel. Israel at this point is like, fuck these people, but you can't keep saying, hey, these hostages are our priority, when that's not your priority. The priority of the Israeli government is getting rid of Hamas, which I don't even think you can really do at this point, because they've killed so many civilians. They're just probably going to be radicalized, and what's their politics going to look like if their son or daughter was massacred by the Israelis?
Yeah. But let me just say, in what world is Hamas going to say, we're going to release all the hostages and you carry on killing us? Obviously, outside world, America, Western countries has been wanting a ceasefire for a while. We were told Hamas was the obstacle, and now they're calling Israel's bluff. The reality is, Abby, that the obstacle to a hostage deal has always been Benjamin Netanyahu, and those are not my words. Those are the words of Chaim Rubinstein, the former spokesperson for the hostages' family, who told the Israeli press last week that Netanyahu's been the obstacle. He says that they found out there was a deal on the table back on October 9th, 10th. To get hostages released, but Netanyahu hid it from them. Those are the words of the spokesperson for the Israeli families of the hostages. And he hid it from them because he knows that if he agrees to a hostage deal, his fascist colleagues in his coalition government will collapse his government. This is Israeli domestic politics.
Lieutenant Colonel, what about that? I mean, if the hostages are all released, shouldn't Israel seriously consider ending hostilities in Gaza and allowing for a political settlement that leads to the future?
I'm listening to the second edition of Mehdi Hasan's monologue that I saw earlier, and it's not surprising that you're parroting Hamas talking points.
This is what I really hate about all governments, is if you disagree with us, you're with Hamas. Similar how in the Bush administration, if you disagreed going into Iraq, well, you must love Saddam Hussein. Stop labeling people who disagree with you as being with the enemy, because it just gets old, and it's also just blatant propaganda, just saying like, hey, we're just going to say anyone who disagrees with us, they're with Hamas.
Let's put things here in perspective. We have a terrorist organization that abducted civilians and soldiers.
That your government
propped up. For the last 4 months have been refusing any deal that Israel, the US, Qatar, Egypt, and others have put forward. And now, when push comes to shove, and when they see Israeli tanks lined up on their way to Rafah, all of a sudden they are agreeing. They're agreeing to something that wasn't on the table. And it's quite absurd that this is even how it's covered. And it's classic deception 101 by an organization that is very savvy in deception and unfortunately has figureheads and mouthpieces all over Western media doing their work, whether it's on Jazeera or other places.
Quick side note here, Israel actually just banned Al Jazeera from operating inside of Israel, which is just dumb to me because, hey, there's a lot of media that I disagree with, like MSDNC, I call it, just blatant Democrat propaganda. And then we have Fox News, which is blatant Republican propaganda. I hate both these organizations. I don't think they should be banned. And the Israeli government is doing what they can to squash dissent. And even a White House spokesperson who have been vigorously defending Israel in this war even said this development is disturbing.
So I think all of your viewers saw me quote the spokesperson for the Israeli hostages' families. And the colonel then said, I'm parroting Hamas talking points. He's referring to the hostages' families as Hamas, as parroting Hamas talking points, because I quoted them. I didn't quote Hamas. In fact, tonight, the colonel knows that hundreds of people went to Netanyahu's house and screamed, "You have blood on your hands," Israeli protesters. I guess they're all Hamas.
I mean, Hamas, it seems like, shouldn't be in a position to be dictating the terms of their own surrender in a war that they started.
So it's a good question, Abby, and it's a reasonable goal. Of course it is. But if you don't want Hamas to be in a position to attack you again, maybe you shouldn't energize and embolden Hamas. This entire conflict has turned Palestinians in the entire region against Israel. It's made Israelis less safe, not more safe. It's obviously killed tens of thousands of Palestinians. And Israel has a right to say, okay, we don't want to be attacked again, but at what cost?
So I think this will play out in two ways. Let's take the optimistic one. So Israel is successful in removing Hamas from the government authority in Gaza. They then don't have an excuse to put a blockade there if they are able to actually remove Hamas from power, who's threatening them with rockets constantly. So then maybe after Hamas is gone, we can actually push for a Palestinian state and some sort of peace negotiation. So the pessimistic side of me is Israel just pushing them towards the Egyptian border in Rafah in order to try to expel them into the Sinai desert? So I hope Israel's plan isn't that. I hope it's the latter, not the former, because I don't think Israel wants to constantly be occupying Palestinians.
Yeah, I would take everything that my respected colleague to the panel here says with a lot of pinches of salt. Lots of untruths were said when I was on air and off air, and I won't give them credibility by repeating them. What I'll say is this. Rafah is a place where Hamas and UNRWA has told people to go. The sad reality in Gaza is that Hamas uses these civilians as human shields and doesn't leave Israel with any other option but to ask people to leave.
They were trying to claim that UNRWA was a part of Hamas, and they've produced no evidence. Multiple news organizations have confirmed this. He's doing the exact same thing that George W. Bush did in the lead up to the Iraq War. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. So if I disagree with you, I'm with the terrorists.
Right. So there are various locations in Gaza, a few miles northeast of Rafah and northwest of Rafah, close to Khan Yunis, where they can go, and hopefully they will go. And I agree. I take the point that it is a harsh environment and not an ideal environment for anybody to live in. I wouldn't want to be there, to be frank. But the sad reality is that the responsibility for this situation lies on Hamas's shoulders. And I think that if we detach ourselves from agendas and ideas and Israel hatred, and if we look at the situation from a, let's say, a more clean perspective, what choice does Israel have? What choice does Israel have in order to defend its civilians in their homes?
I do think Israel has acted in a way of trying to protect civilian lives, but also they're also preventing 70% of the aid from going in. But putting that aside, no other country drops leaflets, no other country warns civilian populations, no other country does roof knocking and tries to warn the people in the building, hey, get out of this building. And Hamas does embed itself in civilian populations in order to maximize civilian deaths. I'm sorry, that's an inconvenient truth to people. Hamas knew after October 7th happened, they knew Israel was going to respond and kill a bunch of their civilians. They just don't care.
Everyone who disagrees with the colonel is Hamas. And by the way, he's quoting a Hamas spokesman. None of us like Hamas. But let's quote someone on his side, the Likud Party international vice chairman, Netanyahu's party. He said a couple of days ago, the Likud Party vice chair, Colonel, you can respond to this quote. The Likud Party vice chair, international vice chair, said on Israeli TV a couple of days ago, there are no uninvolved civilians in Rafah. No, there are no innocent people in Rafah, 1.2 million. No innocent people, and we should go in, these are his words, and kill and kill and kill. Sounds pretty genocidal to me, Colonel. Do you agree with that?
And this is why the Israeli and Palestinian conflict is not resolved, because there are extremists on both sides. Israel thinks, hey, the status quo is maintainable and we can continue to steal more Palestinian land on the West Bank. We have religious fundamentalists in charge of both of these entities, and there's not going to be a partner for peace. Benjamin Netanyahu's not a partner for peace, and neither is Hamas.
I agree that those are comments that are horrible and shouldn't be thought and shouldn't be said, and I'm happy that I don't have to explain the Likud Party or whoever that is that you're sourcing, and I haven't heard the quote. But I can tell you what the chief of staff the guy that is responsible for the use of force in Gaza, and he speaks relentlessly about not killing civilians, and he gives orders not to kill civilians. Yesterday, 4 soldiers were killed when mortars were fired from Rafah, from a safe zone, at Israeli soldiers. And I'm sure that wouldn't bother you too much that 4 soldiers are killed, but they were killed, fired from a safe zone in Rafah.